cross to him.
Matt. I hope we're ahead, mate.
We're losing because I'm not playing.
Nothing like self-confidence. Well, look, thank you, and thank you for coming to the lock-up. I thought it was really important that we explain the why of where our position has landed today. And I'm proud to say that our party room has got to a unanimous position of scrapping net zero commitments by 2050. I, a little while ago, informed the opposition leader, Susan Lee, of the National Party's decision to scrap net zero by 2050 and to set a policy platform predicated on principles. Principles about a better, cheaper, fairer way to reduce our emissions and to have an energy policy that will actually work for Australians. It'll save jobs. When you see thousands of jobs being lost and at risk, even this week from Tomago, you see the household stress on their energy bills. They should be seeing every quarter Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen's face on those energy bills when they open up, because they've gone up by 40% since we signed up to net zero by 2050. So what we want to do is be responsible, be better in terms of the policy of getting practical measures on the ground to address climate change and our environment, empowering local communities to have a stronger, more resilient environment, around adaptation, where we've been focused solely on mitigation. And when you're only a bit over 1% of total global emissions, you can hardly mitigate the world's emissions. We should be looking and putting more into adaptation, empowering landholders to be able to have those environmental outcomes. We need to prioritise cheaper energy, and that is where we've made it very clear around using technology, not just having an all-renewables approach. This government is going down an all-renewables approach that will cost $1.4 trillion, I should say, $1.4 trillion. And that's without costing and adding in to the extra 15 gigawatts of firming gas power, nor the transmission lines. And this is something that Australians need to understand they're already seeing in their bill, and they're going to continue to see in their bill if we move forward. But we want to be fair. We're not only here in taking the burden off regional Australia, because to get to where we are at the moment, nearly all our emissions, 95% of our emissions reductions have come from the change of land use. We've lost 7.2 million hectares of agricultural land, and to get to where the government wants us to, we'll lose another 5.1 million hectares. That is your food security. That is pushing up your food prices. Regional Australia is being torn apart. And what we're saying is, let's do this in a fairer way and use some of the mechanisms that we've used in the past, like the Emissions Reduction Fund, that has practical measures that alleviates the use of agricultural land and pushes it on to those good environmental stewardship programs. And when we talk about fairness, we also talk about our role in the world. We're not walking away from reducing emissions. We continue to believe that we need to reduce emissions, but we've got to do it in a better, fairer, cheaper way for all Australians. And what we are going to say is that we believe that we can peg ourselves to the rest of the world. We're not going to be a laggard, but we're not going to streak ahead. Let's put all this pressure on households and businesses. We're going to make sure that if the world moves, we move with them, that we have an agile model that ensures that our economy isn't held back by an ideology that is already seeing our industrial base being torn apart. This is about bringing common sense back to climate and energy policy. This is about saying we're going to live up to our commitments internationally. We're going to do that sensibly, but we're going to do what they're doing at their pace, not streak ahead. And so what I want to do is show today some leadership. There'll be puerile arguments that we're climate deniers and we've been left behind. That doesn't advance the intellectual debate in this country at all. I'd rather sit and look the Australian people in the eye and say there is a better, cheaper, fairer way for us to reduce our emissions and being able for you to have a job and to be able to have a lifestyle that Australians have enjoyed for so long. That's political leadership. That's what it says to the Australian people, that we're up for this conversation, to say to them that net zero is not the only way to reduce emissions and to address climate change. I challenge the Prime Minister to have that conversation without the puerile arguments and to actually look at the numbers. And can I thank both Matt Canavan and Ross Cadell, and particularly in the engagement of the Page Research Institute. and what Jared Holland, the CEO, has been able to present to us. This has been a long process. It started in June, straight after the election, a unanimous decision of our party room to go down this process, but we are now at the juncture where we can make that commitment that we are now scrapping net zero by 2050. I'll ask my deputy, Kevin Hogan, to say a few words.
Look, thanks, David. And look, I think this is quite an exciting day. I think Australians now have a choice. As David said, we have come up with a well-researched, documented plan here that we think is cheaper, better and fairer. Now, why do I say that? We are not walking away from emission reductions. We are committed to emission reductions. That was both mentioned at our meeting yesterday, our Federal Council meeting, but also in our party room today. There is a commitment to lower emissions. However, what we also want is we want Australian households, we want Australian businesses to have energy bills that they can afford. We have seen regularly, Tomago this week, and many businesses over the last 6 to 8 weeks that cannot afford their power bills and need government bailouts. When you have that situation, you know that you have a problem in this country, and we need to address it and give the Australian public a choice. Also, when we say we're going to meet emission reductions, we have a very independent process which we will go into, and Matt and Jared might go into that a bit later, but that we are going to tie ourselves to the average decrease in OECD emissions. We will tie ourselves to that, and we will commit resources to make sure that we meet those emission reductions. But very importantly, this is going to be a cheaper model for Australia and be a lot cheaper than Labor's renewable-only policy. But it's also going to be fairer in the sense that it's going to be more across the economy. Regional Australia is wearing a lot of this with land lock-up and also with big industry that's been lost from regional Australia. So this is an exciting day. We want to meet emission reduction responsibilities, but we're going to do it in a cheaper, better and fairer way. Thank you.
Matty, did you just want, Ross, did you just want as the authors?
Happy to say a few words. Look, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here, and I want to thank our leader, David Littleproud, and the whole Nationals Party team for giving me this privilege with Ross Cadell to review what's happening with net zero. And as part of our review, it's become very clear that net zero is past its use-by date. It's past its use-by date because it's leading only to higher energy prices for Australians. It's leading to lost jobs for Australians, particularly in our manufacturing sector, and it's not even improving the environment as well. The government's plans are instead desecrating thousands upon thousands of hectares of our beautiful bushland with massive renewable projects. Our review has found that there is a much better way to do things in this country. There's a much better way to ensure we do protect our environment and deliver jobs, opportunities and a lower cost of living for Australians. We found that because we are rushing way beyond the rest of the world. Our run rate on emissions reductions is going way faster than even rich countries. Forget about China and India. We have been reducing our emissions in this country at a rate of 9 million tonnes per year, whereas other rich countries, the average of the OECD, is at 4 to 5 million tonnes per year, double the rate. And what's even more concerning is that going forward over the next 10 years, we're going to increase that even further, and we'll be cutting our emissions, if we did what the government's plan is, at a rate 3 times advanced economies in the world. To my mind, and to Ross, to all of our party room now, the question has to be asked, why would we impose a greater burden on Australians when other countries are not doing that as well? What we've got right now is not a fair go on climate. What we've got right now from Chris Bowen, Labor Party, is not a fair go for Australians suffering under higher energy prices, for Australians losing their jobs because we can't deliver power at a competitive rate anymore. And I'm very glad today to see the Nationals Party stand up on this and fight, because the first job of an opposition is to have a voice, not an echo. And we, the Nationals Party, have found our voice today. We are now going to be a voice for the pensioners and the students who can't afford their power bill. We're going to be a voice for the people at Tomago who are facing the loss of their jobs, and the people over in the west that we've all forgotten who lost their jobs when the nickel industry left our shores. And we are going to be the voice for those landowners who are seeing their ambience, their backyards destroyed by an obsessive pursuit of renewable energy above all other goals. So I can't wait now to get out there and fight for all of these people, for Australians, and make sure that there is a choice provided to Australians when it comes to this net zero idea, which is just not working for our country.
I'll start moving. Yeah.
This is a potentially different position with the Liberals. Are you willing to split the coalition again if the Civil Party comes down
Well, there's a structured process, one in which the Liberal Party has respected the sovereignty of our party room. We've got to our position before the Liberal Party has settled theirs. So we'll respect the Liberal Party and the processes that they're going to undertake. When that's determined, then we'll have those discussions after that. And in fact, so much so that both Susan Lee and I have had discussions about a structured process that could ensure that we can have those discussions in a constructive manner. We're always keeping our door open, but I'm respecting the sovereignty of the Liberal Party as they have respect ours. But we have got to this position because of the hard work that we were prepared to start back in June, because we knew that it was important for us to finalise a position. Wherever the Liberals come, we will respect that. We'll give them the environment and space to do that. But we've got ours. I can only determine what happens to the National Party, not the Liberal Party. After that, the one thing you can be sure of is we'll be constructive, but we have clear principles that we are setting ourselves up to today.
You're not going to negotiate some kind of back down where you are.
Well, I think it's unwise to be preemptive about where the Liberal Party may get to. I don't know the inner workings of the Liberal Party, don't care to, but I'll let them and create the environment for them to get to their position. That's leadership. That's the mature thing to do, is allow them to do that. Phil?
So, David, further to that, do you see it as plausible? A lot of the Liberals want still some mention of 2050, some mention of net zero. Do you see it plausible the remaining coalition, but the parties have separate policies?
Well, again, let's not go into hypotheticals. Let's see where the Liberal Party gets to, and we'll have those constructive conversations then. I don't intend to have a running commentary on the Liberal Party and their processes. They haven't on ours, and I think it's important to respect that. That's what a good coalition should do.
Yes, the Liberal Party, you disappointed Barnaby Joyce wasn't in attendance at today's party room meeting. He says the relationship's deteriorating. Is today hopefully an olive branch for him to come back by scrapping net zero?
Well, he was issued an invitation, and it would have been great for him to be in the room. He's still a member of the National Party, and I think he would have contributed greatly to our room today. The offer is there. He can walk in to our party room and continue to be part of our party room. The process that we completed today was one that he and the rest of us all voted on, was the unanimous position of the process that we would undertake to get to this point. So he's welcome back and to contribute further as we move forward without a shadow of doubt.
Mr. Littleproud, do you concede
I'll keep coming, you won't miss out.
Do you concede that although this policy that you've come up with today may play well in your electorates, it probably won't in inner city seats, the seats that ultimately the coalition does need to win back if you and the Liberals want to end up in government?
Well, with all due respect, we're still committing to reducing emissions, which is what people in metropolitan Australia and regional Australia want. We're committing to reducing their energy bills with a sensible energy policy that is technology agnostic, to the sense of getting the best technology into the grid. We are saying to them that we are not going to force you to pay $9 trillion for this net zero ideology that Anthony Albanese has. That means you're putting Medicare at risk. I mean, the best friend of Medicare at the moment is the National Party, because Australia can't afford to pay $9 trillion for this net zero idea of...
This will hurt the coalition.
Well, why would it? We're not denying the science of climate change. What we're saying is there's a better, cheaper, fairer way to address it. Now, I'm prepared to have a mature conversation with the people of metropolitan Australia about our commitment to making their lives cheaper, to fight for their energy bills coming down, to fight for their jobs in heavy industry, to say to them, it doesn't matter that I'm a national. I actually probably represent more teachers and nurses than I do farmers, but our history has always been in agriculture. But much of those values and principles of regional Australians are the same as those that live in the leafy suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne. It's just that we don't have as much money in our wallet. So the reality is, I'm saying, we're not walking away from reducing emissions. We're using common sense and bringing common sense to this debate, and saying to your fellow Australians, particularly those in those leafy suburbs, to appreciate and understand the burden you're asking regional Australians to bear. When you talk about what is being imposed on us out there, already have lost 7.2 million hectares of our income, now another 5.1 million hectares. I just say to them, they can rail against 8 wind turbines at North Head, and I'm with them. But why wouldn't you do that for us? When our livelihoods, when our families are being torn apart, are there two classes of Australian? No. We are all given equal value in this country, and I say to them, we are committed to reducing emissions. We're simply saying, open your minds up to a better, cheaper, fairer way to achieve it.
Mr. Littleproud,
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Thank you. What was Susan Lee's reaction when you informed her of the policy platform? And also, your announced the Nationals policy sort of confirmation has come a little ahead of schedule. Earlier this week you said you wanted to nut something out by the end of the year. Are you hoping today's announcement sort of, gets the Liberals to come to the table and agree on something so the coalition as a whole can start making...
Well, it might surprise you, but I don't tell you everything all the time in terms of our plans. We had a briefing on this on Monday, and our plan had always been that we knew that we had a federal council and that motion was coming to a pointy end that our members would want us to address. There was some extra modelling that couldn't be obtained, and so we brought forward some months ago the aim to try and bring this to this juncture today. And I've got to say, Page Research and Matt and Ross worked hard to ensure that we could get to this timeline. So we have been working towards this. This has been the juncture that we wanted to get to. It was always going to have to be the last 2 to 3 weeks of sitting anyway. I've always wanted to have it done, but having our federal council yesterday, the questions I would have got today is, you've been given a direction by your membership, what are you doing about it? I think it shows greater leadership of our party room that we have been able to align this with where our membership, and that is what we are. We are servants of our membership, and we've been able to undertake that. With respect to conversations with Susan Lee, I don't divulge those. Those are private conversations, but I explained our position and our policy position, and in fact have provided her a policy document that Page Research has undertaken that I've offered to her, in fact, back on Saturday or Friday, to ensure that she was fully cognisant of what we were considering out of respect. Private conversations remain private.
Was it well received?
Well, I won't talk about private conversations.
I respect your point around federal council, but have you been unfair to your Liberal colleagues by coming out in front of this? You say, well, I would have gotten all these questions about what are you doing about it. Have you not just shifted that burden onto the Liberals? No. I've respected if the Liberal Party, in fact the Liberal Party were publicly saying that Friday was their last consultation meeting. I respect the Liberal Party's sovereignty, and they have different processes. We started a separate process back in June that initiated this work, and we wanted it done so that we could finalise our position. And then we have already initiated with the Liberal Party, understanding that there will be 2 different policy positions put. They will have similarities. What they are, we'll work through once they're determined. But the processes have already put in place for when the Liberal Party get to their position. So we've shown the respect. We've worked constructively all the way through this. Now, whenever the Liberal Party gets to their decision and their determination of their position, we'll respect. But we've made ours, and we're going to go and fight for that because we believe in a better, cheaper, fairer way for every Australian, no matter their postcode, that we can achieve emissions reductions, live up to our international commitments and help bring down their cost of living.
Mr. Littleproud, one of the Page recommendations is to repeal the 2020 Climate Change Act. Is that something you'd like to take to the next election? And a second question, if I may, how much will this actually make power bills cheaper?
Well, firstly, we voted against that 2022 bill. In fact, the Nationals and Liberals voted against that bill. And I think the coalition position has been very strong for some time, is that we don't legislate targets. Unless we're in government, and in government then obviously there are other commitments, but in opposition we actually don't legislate targets. So with respect to that, I don't think that's earth-shattering. I myself sat in that chamber and voted against it, so there is no issue. And the first question, sorry, was?
And what kind of actual impact would this have on power prices?
Well, what we will continue to do now is, now that we have our guiding principles, and you look at things like the ERF being brought back in, but also if we were to take and change the guidelines of the energy regulator in terms of how they determine how energy is generated, instead of bringing into account all these international commitments, but in fact prioritise cheaper energy sources as a priority while still taking into account emissions reductions, then we may see a better outcome with respect of what is our energy mix, as well as things like the capacity investment scheme being extended as it was recommended to things like existing coal-fired power stations and to gas, and to obviously in the long term to take away the moratorium on nuclear. The reality is that's a common sense approach. Those are the tools that are available to us right here and now. Why wouldn't we use them? And if Anthony Albanese was serious, rather than being ideological, Why wouldn't he extend the CIS to existing coal-fired power stations? The Queensland Government's just extended the life of their coal-fired power stations. And if you look at wholesale prices and the announcement Bowen talked about last week, the biggest drop in wholesale prices was in Queensland, where coal generation actually was, rather than in South Australia, where they're all renewables.
You've alluded to this earlier in the week, which is that the Liberals and Nationals could have potentially different positions on net zero and remain together. How would that possibly be workable?
Well, that's conversations into the future. What we've done is settled our position, predicated on a long-standing process that we all agreed to in our party room. I'll let the Liberal Party get to that position themselves, and when they do, we'll sit down constructively, as we have for over 100 years. And that's what you come to with good faith, being constructive in making sure that we can try to find common ground. And that's what we enter all negotiations with, and it stood the test of time.
Is it prepared to break up over it?
Well, again, I think you're trying to bring hypotheticals into it. Let's just create an environment for the Liberal Party to have their discussions like we have in our party room. And it's been, I think our discussion today was, since The Voice, I think was probably one of the best discussions we had, where all the ideas were just ruminated, and to get to a unanimous position, I think shows the maturity of the National Party in respecting one another, but doing it through a structured process that has served us so well.
It was a lengthy meeting this morning. What were the different positions that MPs brought? Were there people with reservations that had to be talked around to this unanimous?
No, to be honest, it's probably more to deal with you guys, and it was a unanimous position. But obviously, we are going to. I mean, let's not be naive. The reality is this: Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese are going to go on this smear campaign. They did it during their campaign, talking about this $600 billion nuclear lie. In fact, if you want to have a look at that little chestnut, and I encourage you all to ask these questions of Anthony Albanese during the campaign, Frontier Economics had our total grid, which was 39% nuclear, about 54% renewables, and the rest was gas and coal, at in total $331 billion. Talk about Rainforest Reserve. Where's the question to Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese, who have placed that at $1.382 trillion without the transmission lines and without the 15 extra gigawatts of gas to firm it? The reality is, I'll put our numbers against theirs every day of the week, and this is what we're saying to the Australian people. Take away the plurality of Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen going red at the face, screaming at us in the chamber. Let's have some political leadership in this country. Let's actually stand in front of the Australian people and say there is a better, fairer, cheaper way that we can do this to them, and that we can do this while living up to our international commitment, and give them hope that we are going to leave behind a better planet than we've got now. Why wouldn't we start that conversation? And I'm proud that these men and women with me here today are bold enough and courageous enough to start that conversation. And if they don't want to get into an intellectual debate, well then the answer is right there.
You spoke a little bit about climate adaptation. How much money are you willing to sort of put on the line to actually fund projects that would mitigate the impacts of bushfires, floods?
Well, so I think this is the enormous opportunity when you think about the fact that we're already putting out around $9 billion a year in climate subsidies, and we're looking towards mitigation rather than adaptation. And when we can't mitigate all the emissions of the world, when we're only about a bit over 1% of total emissions, why wouldn't we look at adaptation, about putting in place the tactile things, even looking at things like dams? I mean, if you're going to have more severe weather events and more rain coming at particular times, why wouldn't we catch it? That's an adaptation model. So this is where we have the scope, and we will work through those particular models. There's ones of the past that have worked well, working with organisations like Landcare, working with making sure that state forests and national parks are actually managed properly, rather than be this harbour of pests and disease and weeds that come out of them. So there are practical measures, but you have the scope, and we'll be announcing those further. But what we want to do is not get ahead of ourselves with our coalition partners, because at that juncture, I think there is scope for us to work together about what that might look like. But those are the practical ideas, that we can have tactile policies that show the Australian people that we're not just addressing emissions reductions, we're actually having a real impact on the natural environment.
Mr. Lippert, what's the actual number on emissions reductions that you would get under your new policy? Doesn't tying Australia to an OECD average actually take control out of our hands? If we, we could suddenly go up and we might be left behind. And my third one is there's a lot of quite detailed recommendations in this page report. Have you adopted all? Should we be taking them into your policy? Can you get an actual?
No, not all of them have been adopted, and we'll continue to work through those. And obviously, we've excluded, when you talk about OECD, we've excluded specifically India and China out of that, because that would actually mean that instead of about 1.1%, we'd be about 1.89% of total global emissions. So it was important to remove those and to look at like countries. That somewhere is between 2 and 9 million tonnes a year, I think, from memory, that we would be able to abate. And so that by pegging ourselves to the rest of the world, and if they move, well, we're able to have the agility to move with them. That is a common sense solution to say to the world that we're still committed, we're still going to do it, we're going to protect Australia, we're going to bring down the pressures that Australian families and industry are feeling in this ideological race that is making Australia poorer. That's what it is. We're putting at risk things like Medicare because of this $9 trillion ideological race to net zero by 2050. How does Anthony Albanese, how's he going to hold his little green card up without a credit card if we get to that? Why wouldn't we do what the rest of the world's doing instead of skating ahead? We don't want to be a laggard. We want to tie ourselves, be responsible, but do it a uniquely Australian way. That's common sense, and that's what we want to bring to this debate. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
You said that the Nationals have dropped net zero by 2050. Does Nationals have any commitment or aspiration to net zero at any stage? And secondly, the Paris Agreement, do you think Australia needs to leave the Paris Agreement or at least update that 2050 target of the coalition?
Well, look, we're not interested in long-term targets. What we should be doing is what the rest of the world is doing. And the rest of the world's not going to get to net zero by 2050. Let's be honest. Well, you never say never when technology continues to evolve. No, I mean, we would commit ourselves to the smaller, short-term targets that the rest of the world is undertaking and tying ourselves to them in a responsible way with the solutions that we have at our disposal here in Australia. That's the common sense solution to make sure that we are saying, as the world moves, we move with them. But to have lofty, long-term aspirational goals is why we're in this place now. That's why we've got ourselves to a position whereby it's going to cost you $9 trillion to go to this by 2050.
And on the Paris Agreement?
In terms of Paris, we haven't said we'll remove ourselves. At Paris, it's a way for us to be able to benchmark and get those numbers and be able to
change our mid-century goal, wouldn't we though?
Well, we're not in government, and we would work through that. There are technicalities that I think even in the report you would be able to ascertain that it's not necessarily clear about the goals that we would have, but they would be set in government and when we get to government. Even today, I think if you're on that trajectory, we'd be sitting about 30 to 40%, I think, would be our achievements would be at the moment. So with respect to that, when we get into government, then we would work through those aspects of that part of the agreement. There was no discussion in the room to remove it, to take it away at this point, but obviously we continue to work through it.
Proud. The page review speaks to a lot of the gains in land use change already being made. Assuming you adopt nuclear, that's maybe a decade before it comes online. Would you be comfortable with emissions rising for a few years until you fall back in line with that OECD average?
Well, I think we can achieve what we're talking about with the Emissions Reduction Fund and those types of... Well, in the short term, exactly. I mean, I think there is a lot that has been done and can continue to be done in the short term. What we would do by actually extending, and what Queensland's done by extending coal, with including the CIS as a participant, means that we can not only give us time to replace that baseload power, but we can actually put downward pressure on energy prices with what they're providing to renewable companies. Why wouldn't we do that when it's going to be part of our grid for some time to come? So
it wouldn't cut emissions. I mean, would you be comfortable with emissions, bumping up slightly?
Well, I think you will find that there is every ability for us to continue to peg ourselves, considering where we are, and taking China and India out of that assumption of lining with Europe, with the OECD.
So is there a risk doing what you're doing, you're swinging the pendulum too far the other way in terms of investment certainty. One of the reasons we're in one of the main reasons we're in this mess now of energy is because we've had these violent wars in this place for the last 20 years, and people haven't invested until recently. They're told these long locking clauses, and so by removing as you know, investment is a long-term proposal. You don't do it from year to year. By going far back.
But that wouldn't the argument to that, Phil, quite clearly. No, the reality is if you extend the capacity investment scheme to existing coal, you buy that insurance. You insure, which is a recommendation to ensure that any transition you take, whether that be gas or renewables, can be done in an orderly way. And in fact, if you talk about, and also the point to understand, even with the firming that the government is talking about, getting to 92% renewables, you're talking about, for some of these gas peaking plants, some of those turbine blades have a production wait list of about 10 years for some of the blades. So let me tell you that some of what the government is talking about is going to take some time, and that's before you get to the supply chain on the turbines and panels and alike. So what we are saying is use common sense, use the vehicles that are there. The capacity investment scheme being extended will support a sensible investment transition and opening it up to nuclear energy as well as any technology.
Do you think we national policy,
well,
including coal in it?
Well, we're technology agnostic. It's the best technology. Building a Healy coal-fired power station brings down its emissions. You do realise that, and that's before you even think about carbon capture storage, if you add that as an additionality. So the reality is that we need to get back to first principle rather than this mindset that has been drilled into us about ideology that is about purity of just one form of energy source, that we need to think practically as a nation, and that's by changing the rules of the energy operator about looking at what is going to set the most affordable and cheapest energy while bringing in those principles of reducing emissions, means that we get a more common sense solution to our energy grid. Why would we close our mind off to that when you see the people of Tomago are sitting there tonight going, I have no hope of a job because their energy bills are too high? Why wouldn't you not open your mind up to that? Why would you not say you would use that vehicle? To me, that's common sense.
Just quickly policy in the last election to build government-funded nuclear power plants. Should that happen with coal?
Sorry?
Should that happen with coal?
Well, the normal approval processes would take place. But just understand with nuclear, you need the water supply. And the reason we confined it to those 7 locations was the existing water entitlements could be used. And the fact is the transmission lines are there. You can reuse the existing transmission lines. So again, we should be looking at it through the lens of providing baseload power. And our nuclear policy, and if you recall, we left the coalition for about 8 days. And one of those 4 policies that we had issue with was nuclear energy. So the coalition is back together because the Liberal Party's agreed to that. The details of what our nuclear policy will look like are being formed and continue to be formed over the last couple of months as well.
That nuclear policy has now been pushed at least 3 years into the distance because of the election result. Should that be adopted for something like coal that give you baseline?
Well, everything should be on the table. And that's what we're trying to set the policy settings that give the levers, particularly even to the independent energy operators, to be able to make those decisions through the lens of what gives us the most affordable energy and sticks to the principle of continue to reduce our emissions. And that's what no one should forget. We are signed up to reducing emissions. We continue to want to reduce emissions. And you can do that, and we should not close our minds to the opportunities that lie ahead of us in whatever technology that may be.
If the Liberals come back as a compromise and say we want to, why don't we commit together to net zero by the second half of the century? Would that be a fair?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. What I'm here today is to say the National Party has put a line in the sand to go and fight for Australians that are doing it tough in their energy bills, in holding on to their jobs in heavy industry, to give them some hope that there is another way to reduce our emissions, to actually have an economy that works, that is better, that is fairer and is cheaper.
Yeah.
Hold on, this one and then that one, and we'll finish up.
On land use, we've heard a lot about not wanting native forests to be cleared for renewables projects. Should native forests be cleared for more agricultural land?
Now, there's already, and to a question Phil asked in the lockup, let me make this clear. Agriculture does not knock any remnant vegetation down in a year. The numbers that much of the environmentalists talk about is regrowth. There are state laws around vegetation management. They were brought in under the Howard government, and there was $350 million put into the National Heritage Trust given to states that was meant to go to farmers for compensation of their property rights being eroded. Instead, the states put it in their pocket. So it is an absolute lie to say that agriculture is out there knocking down remnant vegetation. There are strict state tree clearing laws that prohibit that. Regrowth is allowed, but that is how we met Kyoto, is because of Australian farmers, and how we have gone further, as we have articulated today, around farm use. So farmers have done the job, they've got us to Kyoto, and there's no need to come back. Sorry, one last one and we're done.
On the coalition negotiations, you say you don't want to get into hypotheticals, but this might not be hypothetical for much longer. Parliament's sitting next week, party room meetings are coming up. Are you confident that the coalition can negotiate a compromise forward on this?
Well, we go in with good faith, and that's the principle we always do. But we're our own sovereign party. We've got a right to stand up for the people that have sent us here, and we take that seriously. And that's why we've taken a very considered approach to working through this, and to come up with an alternative. Not to say no, not to be a party of protest, and just say no and walk away. That'd be easy. I could have done that after the federal election. But no, we took the considered way, to go out there and to put some methodology around this and to find a better, fairer, cheaper way to do it. That is common sense. That's leadership. That's what you want from a political party, not just saying no, but to get on with the job and say to the Australian people, forget the arguments about what you might think of us. Let's actually look at the facts. I think I'd rather have that, and I'll have that with the Liberal Party in a constructive way, as we always have and always will. Thanks for that.